Hello, and welcome to today's Daily Chronicle. Today is Tuesday, October 7th, 2025. Amid funding cuts and public health battles, NIH issues autism research grants. President Trump answers questions after making an announcement on significant medical and scientific findings for America's children at the White House on September 22nd. Federal health officials suggested a link between the use of acetaminophen during pregnancy as a risk for autism. Although many health agencies have noted inconclusive results in the research. Researchers at Cornell University have received $5.1 million grant from the Autism Data Science Initiative as part of the Trump administration's increased scrutiny on the disorder and controversial plans to track direct sources for the complex and widely misunderstood condition. The National Institutes of Health announced plans for the $50 million grant project this summer to identify how existing treatments/interventions are used and better understand their outcomes to inform the design of future clinical studies. The funding comes from the administration had previously announced controversial plans to study autism, including a proposed database of individuals with autism compromised of information from sources ranging from pharmacy chains and hospitals to wearable devices with health sensors like smartwatches. Autism is a very, very complex disease, both from the cause and the measurement. The diagnosis and the spectrum of autism. She will lead the Autism Replication, Validation, and Reproducibility Center at Cornell, which will serve as a verification point for all other projects approved through the Autism Research Initiative. Along with colleagues at Cornell, Hong says that they will use what they call R-squared, a replication system established in 1982 that has worked on over 1,000 projects and hundreds of models. What we do is take a model, for example, using genetic variances to predict disease outcome, she said. We take that model, we fit it into our pipeline, and we generate the results on a new set of data, and we compare with the original claim of the model performance like accuracy, etc. The causes and impact of autism have been the focus for decades of research, but the Trump administration has made the study of the condition a key plank of its public health agenda, even as NIH has terminated other federal research grants. President Trump and Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr. have made a number of unproven claims at the causes of autism, including the touting the long-debunked theory that the childhood vaccinations were responsible, and more recently, advising pregnant women against taking the common over-the-counter analgesic Tylenol, despite no clear evidence that acetaminophen was linked to autism diagnosis. What we're seeing coming out of this administration extremely complex and in many ways quite contradictory, said Helen Tager Flusberg, director of the Center for Autism Research Excellence at Boston University and founder of the Coalition of Autism Scientists. On the other hand, a week ago Monday, we had, from the President Trump, from Secretary Kennedy, bogus simplistic ideas that Tylenol and vaccines are responsible for the rise in rates of autism, and taking a very simplistic view, she said. And in contrast to that, as I read every one of the abstracts for these newly funded grants, not a single investigator is taking such a simple-minded approach, Tager Flusberg said. They're all taking a very sophisticated, forward-looking, exciting perspective on the very complex and multifaceted potential nature of factors that contribute to risk for autism. Tager Flusberg said the research coming from the experts in the field of autism is ultimately extremely promising, despite her concerns that the administration may attempt thumbing the scale by promoting non-experts to roles of prominence within the public healthcare system. We're pretty relieved at what we see here, and it's coming out of NIH, and we are grateful that the NIH staff who have involved in developing and seeing this research program through to this point, the amount of work they put into it, and the excellent results, she said. It was a little bit rocky along the way because the timeline and some of the unknowns about how this was going to take place, but at this point, we're pretty pleased, Tager Flusberg said. As long as researchers can avoid being influenced by external sources, she said this funding into autism research is ultimately a good thing. Federal judge declines to immediately block National Guard deployment in Illinois. From left, Oregon Governor Tina Kotek, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, President Trump. Both Oregon and Illinois are suing the Trump administration in federal court over the possible deployment of the National Guard to their states. A federal judge in Illinois declined to immediately block the Trump administration from deploying National Guard troops in the state, giving the administration until Wednesday night to respond to the lawsuit filed by Illinois and Chicago. The state of Illinois and the city of Chicago filed the federal lawsuit on Monday against the Trump administration over its effort to deploy National Guard troops to the state, a day after a federal judge blocked any federalized Guard members from deploying to Oregon. Illinois and Chicago asked the judge to block the Trump administration from federalizing the Illinois National Guard and sending to Illinois any Guard members from other states, including Texas. But U.S. District Judge April Perry allowed the Trump administration until 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday to respond to the lawsuit and set a date for oral arguments to take place at 11 a.m. Thursday. In the lawsuit, Illinois Attorney General Kwame Rule wrote, "The American people, regardless of where they reside, should not live under the threat of the occupation by the United States military, particularly not simply because their city or state leadership has fallen out of the president's favor." It's the latest turn in the dizzying 3-day saga that saw the Trump administration order the federalization of national troops in Illinois and Oregon, as well as dispatch Guard members there from other states. President Trump has for weeks promised to send National Guard members to Chicago and Portland, cities he's characterized as overrun with crime and need of federal law enforcement help. The administration has also said the troops will be used to protect federal immigration agents and federal property. Protesters gather outside a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement facility in Portland, Oregon on Sunday. Local and state leaders in Illinois and Oregon have said the National Guard troops are not needed and that Trump is abusing his power. Violent crime at a low point in Chicago, along with other cities Trump has threatened with National Guard deployments. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek said on Sunday night that Trump's actions are an effort to occupy and incite cities and states that don't share his politics, and I believe that we should expect him to continue to push the limits of his authority. The Trump administration's attempts to deploy the National Guard into the two Democratic-run cities come after it sent Guard members into Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. earlier this year. Here are the latest updates. Chicago sued Trump as it braces for troops. The lawsuit filed Monday argues that the Trump administration can only federalize a state's National Guard in cases of invasion, rebellion, or if the federal government cannot enforce federal laws, and that none of those circumstances exist. Christopher Wells, a lawyer with the Illinois Attorney General's office, said during Monday's hearing that the Trump administration was making a concerted effort to target disfavored jurisdictions that the president doesn't like, and that the court has to put a stop to it. Webbs reported. Over the weekend, Trump authorized the deployment of at least 300 members of the Illinois National Guard. A Pentagon memo viewed by NPR suggested the troops would be used to protect federal property as well as U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Federal Protective Service agents and other federal employees. Additionally, Texas Governor Greg Abbott said he had approved Trump's request to call up 400 members of the Texas National Guard, with some of them slated to go to Illinois. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, a Democrat who has clashed with Trump, blasted the administration's actions over the weekend. We must now start calling this what it is: Trump's invasion, Pritzker said in a post on X. It started with federal agents. It will soon include deploying federalized members of the Illinois National Guard against our wishes, and it will now involve sending in another state's military troops. On Saturday, White House spokesperson Abigail Jackson said in a statement that Trump had federalized the Illinois National Guard troops amidst ongoing violent riots and lawlessness in Chicago in order to protect federal officers and assets, Webbs reported. The ruling was in response to news that Trump had dispatched members of the National Guard to Oregon and had also gotten approval from Texas to do the same. Police and federal officers throw gas canisters to disperse protesters near a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement facility in Portland, Oregon, on Sunday. Oregon and Portland, along with the state of California, went to court and asked U.S. District Judge Karen J. Immergut to block the move. It was one day after she had temporarily blocked Trump from federalizing the Oregon National Guard. I am certainly troubled by now hearing that both California and Texas are being sent to Oregon, which does appear to be a direct contradiction of my order, Immergut, who was appointed to the federal bench by Trump in 2019, wrote in her order, Oregon Public Broadcasting reported. Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield praised the judge's ruling Sunday night. The president can't keep playing whack-a-mole with different states' guard units to get around court orders and the rule of law, he wrote on X. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said in a press briefing Monday afternoon that the administration was appealing the decision. States guard units to get around court orders and the rule of law, he wrote on X. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said in a press briefing Monday afternoon that the administration was appealing the decision and that the ICE facility there had been under siege by protesters. These people are not there to peacefully protest, she said. They are there to cause mayhem and havoc. One day earlier, Immergut ruled that the Trump administration hadn't met the threshold for declaring that recent protests outside the Portland ICE facility constituted a rebellion, saying those demonstrations have generally been fewer than 30 people and largely sedate. The Trump administration had federalized 200 members of the Oregon National Guard the previous Sunday, according to a memo sent to Kotek from the Department of Defense. Trump said after the judge's initial ruling that he hadn't seen the order blocking the federalization of the Oregon National Guard, but that the judge ought to be ashamed of themselves. The Unusual Village aims to help people leave long-term homelessness for good. The Other Side Village is building tiny cottages in Salt Lake City as part of its program to help people who've been chronically homeless. The organization also runs businesses to create jobs for residents. On a weekday morning, about 2 dozen formerly homeless men and women file into a small room on the other side of a village near Salt Lake City. "How have you felt since our last meeting?" asked Melissa Helpworth, a fellow resident here who helps a group that she's felt challenged with a little bit of shame. "The people in this meeting have all been chronically unhoused, typically living outside for 8 to 9 years with significant addiction or mental illness. They are among the hardest to help, and that's exactly who the village has targeted since it opened 2 years ago." Once you've forgotten to work, forgotten how to engage with other people, forgotten how to solve human problems, forgotten how to manage finances, it takes a lot of work to restore some of those abilities, says Joseph Grenny, a co-founder of the Other Side Village. Across the country, much needed housing and treatment programs for the unhoused are in short supply. There's also a heated debate over which should be a bigger priority. The President Trump calling for forced treatment. This ambitious project in Utah offers short-term housing, rehab, and mental health treatment. Along with a kind of training program. People start in prep school that teaches life skills for those who may have lost them. They must get and stay sober and are also required to work. The village runs businesses to help create jobs for that. After 6 to 12 months, fellow residents vote to decide when someone is ready to graduate. At that point, they can move to their own place in tiny cottages in the village is building for permanent housing. "We believe that human beings change when they're in an environment that expects something of them," Granny says. "When we succeed in doing hard things, we start to feel good about ourselves." There are coaches who've been there themselves. The conversation at morning meetings is meant to build community. Because supporting each other is a big part of the therapy here. Resident Patricia Jean Martin says, "It feels like starting a new life with people who can actually trust, be honest with, be accountable with." Patricia Jean Martin on the terrace of the shared apartment at the Other Side Village. She says living there feels like starting a new life with people she can finally trust. But that process can also be intense. You don't have to listen to feedback and just work on it and change your behavior, she says. And if you don't, you will be kicked out. But that process can also be intense. To help with that change, there are coaches who know exactly what people are going through. I was introduced to drugs by one of my mom's boyfriends, probably around 9 or 10 years old, says Coach Jackie Tress. After that came a car wreck and prescription pain pills, and then things really spiraled. Eventually, she lost her house and daughter and living for years on the street and in and out of jail. Every time I got arrested, I would think, all right, this is it, I'm done. And I would be provided resources, she said. But as soon as I hit the street, I would go right back to what I knew. Coach Jackie Tress at the prep school common area. She stands next to the photo of herself when she first exited homelessness. Things changed when she went through the Other Side program herself and could not believe one of the directors had also been homeless and addicted. Because I only saw the woman that was in front of me, she says. She just has so much purpose and grace, and I'm like, okay, if she can do it, I can do it. To drive home this transformation, the common area of the prep school has photos of Jackie and other coaches when they first exited homelessness. She looks exhausted in her photo, with red marks on her face and deep bags below her eyes. Nothing at all like now. Not something usually available to people who are homeless. The Other Side began a decade ago as a training to reintegrate people with a long history of crime and other troubles. But Granny and other co-founders saw a growing need for separate programs to specifically address chronic homelessness. That's defined as when someone with a disability, including addiction or mental illness, has been without housing for at least a year straight, or repeatedly over several years. The number of chronically homeless people in the U.S. hit a record high last year of more than 150,000, mostly living outside. Trying to recover from substance abuse and you're homeless and you're on the street or you're in a shelter, it's very tough, says Dennis Culhane. Who researches homelessness at the University of Pennsylvania. Typical shelter-based programs may only house people at night, leaving them essentially still homeless during the day, he says. There's little structure, certainly no jobs, and dropout rates are high. Meanwhile, there's very little residential rehab. And it's usually for people who have private insurance or can pay out of pocket. So the Utah program is not something usually available to people who are homeless. It's pretty unique in my mind, he says. For the lucky few who can get it, federally subsidized permanent supportive housing also offers treatment for addiction and mental illness, but it's optional, not mandatory. And Culhane says, well, that works for most. It's not for everyone. I did a study of supported housing in New York City, he says, and about 30% of the people wanted to be clean and sober environments. So I think we need every option possible. Still, Culhane says that the Other Side village model is expensive and may be hard to scale up, especially since the sober and work requirements bar federal funding. The program aims to eventually become a self-sufficient through the businesses it runs. But to launch it, it has raised money from donors and gotten several millions of state funding. It's also leasing a large patch of city-owned land for $1 a year, creating community and jobs for the long term. In a wide open dirt field in the land in Salt Lake City, the Other Side Village CEO Preston Cochrane stands near rows of new tiny cottages. There are 60 completed so far, where the first graduates from the prep school moved in less than a year ago. The plan in the next few years is to double prep school enrollment and build hundreds more cottages. We have coaches that live on site as well, just like the prep school, he says. There's also a neighborhood council and regular resident meetings. It's a supportive community, and for many of them, it becomes their family. there's an income limit, but otherwise people can stay here as long as they want. A health clinic is also under construction that will include the mental health services and dentistry. And there will be a grocery store. Both places will offer jobs for residents. Cochrane says that 100% of the folks who live here maintain a sober lifestyle. They pay rent and they work. Jennifer Davis loves her tiny cottage home and her job a short drive away at the Other Side Donuts. The store and the donuts are whimsical and full of color, and people are like, "Oh wow," and they gasp, she says. It's a bright spot. Resident Jennifer Davis is the wholesale logistics manager at the Other Side Donuts. I proves to myself that I could have a career again. I didn't ruin it all with my choices, she says. Davis once had a professional career and owned a condo, but says she spent years lost without housing, family, or friends. She's now the donut store's wholesale logistics manager and says she's grateful for the chance to start over. It proves to myself that I can have a career again. I didn't ruin it all with my choices, she says. I can do a great job. I can be a professional leader.